I was requested to go and take my guitar, which was really terrible. I had to stand up in court with my guitar. So all these people grilling me and talk about how you write a song, which is really difficult because every song is slightly different anyway.
This is probably the most famous songwriting theft of all time, even if it was accidental. It was the first of any solo Beatles songs to reach #1 in the UK and US, but it was stolen from another artist.
My sweet Lord, my Lord,
he's so fine. Wish he were mine.
You've probably heard that George Harrison was found guilty of plagiarising another song when he wrote My Sweet Lord, but the story goes much deeper than that. It involves the Beatles' former manager, Allen Klein, and actually changed copyright law forever. The story begins back in 1969. George Harrison, along with Eric Clapton and Billy Preston, who had just been working with the Beatles in the Get Back sessions, were in Denmark, playing with the duo Delaney and Bonnie on a tour. It was on this tour that Harrison started writing My Sweet Lord. George was deep into spirituality around this time, and was inspired by the Edwin Hawkins singer's rendition of Happy Day, a public domain Christian hymn. He began playing chords and experimenting with the words Hallelujah, Hare Krishna, and My Sweet Lord.
I was on the Delaney and Bonnie tour at the time, and I just thought of the idea, and it was just that answer thing of just singing Hallelujah, Hallelujah, with about 4 or 5 part harmony. So that's what came first, and then the other bit was just like scat singing, My Sweet Lord, My Sweet Lord. It was just a hook.
Fun fact, Billy Preston recorded the song before George Harrison. It was released as a single from 1970's Encouraging Words album, co-produced by George Harrison. Once the Beatles had officially disbanded, Harrison was free to record and release his own songs, and he was sitting on quite a pile of tunes that never made it to Beatles records. So many tunes, in fact, his debut album, All Things Must Pass, was a triple LP and featured the talents of Eric Clapton, Peter Frampton, Alan White and Ringo Starr, among many others. Just a few months after the song's release, February 1971, a lawsuit was filed against Harrison claiming plagiarism. The publisher Bright Tunes accused Harrison of lifting elements from a 1963 song called He's So Fine, performed by the Chiffons and written by their manager Ronald Mack. Mack died shortly after He's So Fine became a hit, and the copyright was owned by Bright Tunes. Without getting into the detail of chord progression and motifs, because I can't claim to really understand any of that, it was argued that the songs were essentially identical in melodic structure, and with some slight tone and pitch adjustment you can actually play the two on top of each other.
really want to show you love, but it won't take long.
Wish he were mine.
My sweet Lord.
He's So Fine had been a pop hit in America, and although it wasn't as big in the UK, both Harrison and Billy Preston admitted to being familiar with it. When I wrote the song, it was more improvised and not fixed. Why didn't I realise? It would have been very easy to change a note here or there and not affect the feeling of the record. The suit went on hold for several years while negotiations took place, and George even offered $150,000 to settle. That was 40% of the song's royalties generated in the USA. But Bright Tunes rejected that offer. More on that later. The case went to court in 1976, and Harrison argued that he didn't intentionally plagiarise He's So Fine, but did admit that the melodies were similar, although not identical.
We ended up with musicologists in court where we had about 25 songs, all with the same structure and the same notes. What happened, they blew up the what they call motive A, which was da-da-da. They had that blown up about 6 feet square in court, and they kept talking about these 3 notes, and the musicologist came on and played like about 15 to 20 songs, all with the same notes.
Judge Richard Owen also happened to be quite an expert when it came to music, and he concluded that Harrison had indeed plagiarised He's So Fine, but did so unintentionally. He suggested Harrison had internalised that song, and it became part of his subconscious, so he wasn't fully aware he was plagiarising when writing My Sweet Lord. Did Harrison deliberately use the music of He's So Fine? I do not believe he did so deliberately. Nevertheless, it is clear that My Sweet Lord is the very same song as He's So Fine, with different words. And Harrison had access to He's So Fine. This is, under the law, infringement of copyright, and is no less so even though subconsciously accomplished. Although, according to George, the judge did make a slip-up.
The judge also was funny talking to my attorney just last week. He said, well, actually, I like both of the songs. My attorney said, what are you talking about? You said it was the same song. And the judge said, what I really mean is I like the same song with the two sets of lyrics. So it's something that I had to treat it, positively or negatively, so I decided to do it this way.
So that was the first phase of the legal proceedings, establishing liability. It's with the second phase that things get a bit interesting. And it's all because of this man, Allen Klein. Allen Klein managed the Beatles at the end of their career and went on to manage the solo careers of George, John and Ringo, all of whom severed ties with him in 1973, leading to issues for all three former Beatles. Klein loved a bit of legal action. It turns out that Allen Klein had been trying to buy Bright Tunes since the lawsuit against My Sweet Lord initially emerged, with the goal of bringing He's So Fine into George Harrison's ownership, therefore ending the dispute. And that's a pretty smart move, to be fair to Allen Klein. After George ended his relationship with Allen Klein, however, Klein continued his efforts to buy Bright Tunes, but this time for his own company, ABK Co. Phase 2 of the case was to decide on damages. Originally, the judge recommended damages to be paid to Bright Tunes to the sum of just under $1.6 million. Proceedings were then delayed several years because Allen Klein had succeeded in purchasing Bright Tunes, along with the rights for He's So Fine, for his own company, ABK Co. in 1978 for $587,000. So Klein had switched sides in this legal battle. First, he was on George Harrison's team, but now he was on the opposing team. George Harrison actually amended his plea to suggest that Klein had enacted improperly in purchasing Bright Tunes, and that he should be disqualified from receiving anything from Harrison. And it was ruled that Klein should not profit from the rights to He's So Fine. But it gets worse. The court also found that Klein had been giving insider information about the royalties the song was generating to Bright Tunes prior to him buying the company. That's why Bright Tunes rejected Harrison's offer of $150,000. They had insider information. The court found that this was a breach of the fiduciary duty owed to Harrison, a duty that continued even after the two parted ways. With all the new information that had come to light, Allen Klein was ordered to sell the rights to He's So Fine to George Harrison for $587,000, the exact amount of money Klein had bought it for in the first place, which meant Klein made exactly $0 from that scheme, and George Harrison paid $1 million less than what was originally determined. And he now owned both He's So Fine and My Sweet Lord. This was a landmark case in music copyright law because it proved an artist could be found guilty of subconscious plagiarism. That term hadn't existed before. In fact, the case is still studied today in law schools because it shaped how courts handle similarity, intent, and copyright disputes in music. For George Harrison, though, it deeply affected his feelings on songwriting.
It made me so paranoid about writing that I thought, God, I don't want to even touch the guitar or the piano in case I'm touching somebody's note.
In the end, George Harrison felt that the spiritual message he was able to give the world through the song was much bigger than any court case about it. And the experience directly inspired 1976's this song. And of course I mentioned earlier that Eric Clapton and Ringo Starr played on My Sweet Lord. As well as them, the members of the band Badfinger also played on that track. In fact, back in the late 60s, they were supposed to be the next Beatles. But it all ended in awful tragedy for them. I've made a whole video on that, you can watch it over there.